Welcome back, friends. In the last video, we were talking about some features like simple, architectural neutral, platform independent, portable, and secure. We have learned about 5 features. I just want to add few more points into portability. In portability, we you might add some context, you might add some points. You can add it by yourself. I'm not going to write this particular feature, write about this particular feature. Let us discuss that feature. Portability means if I can, if I have a machine, if I have a machine where already Java program is running, a Java program is written, I have converted it into a bytecode. Then what we discussed, we can easily migrate this bytecode to Linux. We can easily migrate that bytecode to Mac, to any other machine, right? This is what called as portability. We can happily carry this particular bytecode to any system. Now, the biggest challenge here is if I'm talking about the previous language like C, C++ and all, here what happened? Listen very carefully. There is a data type called as integer. If this particular data type is taken in a 32-bit computer, it will require 2 bytes, that is 16-bit. And if the same integer is taken in a 64-bit compiler, then it will take 32 bits. So what that does mean? That means the memory requirement of this particular data type is different for different architectural machine. So this particular machine, there might be a chance you cannot guarantee कि I'll write a code and compile the code in one machine, I can happily run it in another machine. But here, even if Java provides primitive type, but this primitive type is only created in memory only at the runtime. And who is responsible for that? The responsibility person is JVM. But the greatest advantage of this JVM is, and the Java compiler is JVM is, if it's an integer, whatever the system it may be. If you are using a 32-bit system, if you are using a 64-bit system, doesn't matter. If you are using any kind of system, any bit of compiler, any bit of operating system, always the memory requirement for this data type is always falls into 4 bytes. It can never go beyond 4, it can never go outside of 4 or inside of 4. It is only exact 4 bytes. Similarly for other data types, the memory size required for each data type is same in all systems, regardless of you are using a 32-bit compiler, you are using a 64-bit compiler, you are using a 32-bit operating system, or you are using a 64-bit operating system. So this is one more reason why we can call Java as a portable language, because the data type that we are going to declare will require similar number of bytes in memory in case of 32-bit, in case of 64-bit, doesn't matter what is the bit. Every time you declare a primitive type, it will require exactly same amount of memory for each of the systems. So you can add this point, right? So let us move further. Now we are going to discuss about some more features. After fifth feature, we are coming down to object-oriented programming. See, object-oriented programming. See, this is a very wider concept, and this is a program method. This is a programming method, and apart from object-oriented program, we have methods like with approaches like methods like structure-oriented. We are methods like procedure-oriented. So different methodologies they are using, by using which we can able to channelize the programming methods. But we are not discussing about all this in detail because we do not require that. We'll only concentrate in object-oriented programming language. In object-oriented programming language is a approach that is widely used nowadays, widely used. In object-oriented programming, what happens? Or every problem statement is divided into a smaller unit called as object. And each object has two states, two things. One, the you can call this as an attribute or properties. Second, you can call the second one as behavior. And these behaviors are completely done with the help of these attributes. I can take a small example because in detail we'll cover in Java in detail about this object oriented programming. I think we have to spend not less than 15 hours to cover all the features of object oriented and implementation of that. Just to understand what exactly object-oriented programming is, we can understand from this example. Suppose I'm talking about an object. Object is always a real world object. Suppose I'm talking about an object, let's say mobile phone. Now, mobile phone is a real world object. Every mobile phone had two different things. One, you can call it a specification. Specification as in the processor, the RAM, the internal memory, the camera, all are the properties of a specification of a mobile phone. When I'm talking about the behavior or the functionality, you can say the functionality includes making a call, sending SMS, browsing internet, chatting on WhatsApp. All these are the functions. Now, to make a call, what I need a network. I need a SIM followed by a network. Now, these are the properties. To uh, like to take a picture, I need the attribute camera. If there will be no camera, I cannot take a picture. So what I mean to say is, whenever I talk about a mobile has some specification as well as some functionality. If we combine both of them, then we can get an object, right? Now we can tell, like mobile phones, there is a mobile phone of let's say of model Samsung M1. There is one more mobile phone called as OnePlus Note 7. Now, the properties of the specification parameters are same, but the value of the properties are different. Suppose the screen size of Samsung is, let's say, 6.4, but the same screen size of Note 7 may be 7. So the value of the properties are different, but properties are same. Like screen size is the property, screen size is the property that is same in both, but the value for screen size is different. So now this is one object and this is one object, right? So object oriented programming means we are talking about a real world object. It could be any object, maybe mobile phone, maybe a two-wheeler, maybe three-wheeler, whatever. Now then from that, what we can say, we are considering that one into two category. One is their attribute, second is their functionality, and we go on using this one as per our requirement. So don't worry, we'll talk about this one very deeply while going through the OOPS concept in Java. Let us understand two parameters of object oriented programming. One parameter is a class and second parameter is an object. Let us understand these 2 points, then we can go through. Suppose I am talking about a MI TV. Now, when I'm talking about a MI TV or any TV, suppose there is a model called as 4.4a. In 4a, you said the specifications are there. Specification like the processor, specification operating system, specification like RAM size, specification like internal memory, like this much, like this much. Now, if I'll talk about the behavior or a function, you can say, sir, we can watch movies in this. We can play movies from USB, or we can browse the internet also. Now these are some features, these are some functionality, and these are some properties. Now when MITB is planned to manufacture, now the designer who have designed the specification prior to its manufacturing, before it is getting manufactured, these plans are made ready. Now once this plan is approved by certain team, then MI company, what it does, it approved this particular one for manufacture. Before manufacture, a plan was created. Now that plan again contains some properties and some functions. Now this plan is nothing but called as a class, right? Whenever a MI4A model specification is ready, we can create thousands of TV of MITV. Each TV is an object. Each TV is an object, and each object definitely has same features. Means the processor may be same, the operating system may be same, everything may be same. All the properties are same, but the value in properties might be different. Suppose there is an option, there is a property called as color. This TB might get in red color, this TB might get in green color. So there may be chance the value of some property are different for different objects, but the properties of the same class are same. Like they all these have same properties with different, with might be different set of values, right? So this is all about class and object. And in object oriented programming, everything is based on class and object, right? So in object oriented, lot of features are there, features like inheritance, features like polymorphism, features like encapsulation. We will talk about this feature once we start OOPS concept in Java, but this is, we are just discussing the feature. So as far as our knowledge is concerned, my knowledge is concerned, Java supports almost all the features of object oriented. So you can go like the first point, Java supports almost all the properties of object oriented programming. Properties like, you can add the properties like inheritance, properties like polymorphism, properties like encapsulation, and properties like inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation, properties like this. We can, it also uses all these properties, right? Now the next point is, in Java 1.8 version, this is a very vital announcement Java has given. In 1.8 version, Java introduces two different concepts, two different procedural oriented approach concepts called as Lambda. You just want to know this concept. Like we'll discuss about all these concepts very widely. At 1.8 version of Java, it introduced a procedure oriented approach like Lambda, and the second feature that they have introduced is functional interface. Functional interface, right? Now these two are not object oriented approach, these two are process oriented, procedure oriented approach. Even if these two are process oriented approach, if some person at any point of time ask me whether Java is a procedure oriented approach programming language or not, my answer to that question is no. Even if two features are there, but these two features will be implemented with the help of object oriented programming. They cannot be implemented directly as procedure oriented approach. We will see this particular feature later on in some classes, right? So even if procedure oriented features are there, still Java cannot be called as procedure oriented approach, right? I think this point is pretty clear. So Java supports almost all the properties of object-oriented programming like inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation, and Java handles all the program, all the functionality using by using objects only. So that's why Java is called as object-oriented programming language, right? And trust me, the detail about object-oriented programming we'll discuss definitely when we'll talk about OOPS concept in Java. We'll discuss this point entirely broadly so that you can go on adding the definition of inheritance, the definition of polymorphism, the definition of encapsulation, so that your node will grow more and more. But to start with, we'll say Java supports all the all the properties of object-oriented support programming like inheritance, polymorphism, encapsulation, data abstraction, everything, right? And it handles all the functionality of any problem by using objects only. It doesn't see like procedure-oriented approach. And one thing I've already said with you, in 1.8 version, a thing, a approach has been introduced like procedure-oriented approach. They have introduced two concepts, Lambda and functional interfaces. Even though they are procedure-oriented approach, still Java cannot be called as procedure-oriented approach. That's fine. Next feature and more very important feature we'll discuss is multi-threaded or multi-threading support. What exactly multi-threading is? Prior to that, let us understand what exactly thread is. To understand that one, let us go for an example. Suppose, listen very carefully. Suppose what I have assigned, I have a job to do. Let's say I have a job. I want to complete this job, right? For to complete this job, what I have hired one person, and this particular job is done by one person, let's say in 20 days, right? Listen very carefully. Now, one job, if it is assigned to one person, it will take 20 days. Now, later on I said, Arey boss, I cannot afford this 20 days. So what I can do, I can appoint two persons instead of one person, and these two person work simultaneously. If this is happening, the same job might be completed in 10 to 12 days. I'm taking some average kind of thing. Now the question is, now the conclusion from this discussion is, if we if the same work is done by multiple persons, then the performance will be enhanced, the time execution time will be reduced, right? Because these two persons are working simultaneously, right? So this is what called as parallelization, or this is, you can call this as multiple thread. You can ask me, sir, what is the significance of this one with a programming language? We can take that example, we can take that one in some context. Suppose I have to write a programming language which contains 1,000 lines. I have to write a program which contains 1,000 lines, right? Now, what I have done, I've assigned this particular task to a person called as X. Now, he after investing, let's say, 5 hours, he was able to design that code. Uh, 5 hours daily, he is able to design that code in 12 days. Now, in 12 days, that is completed. But after few days or after few moments or maybe after some time, I discovered this 1,000 line can be divided into two categories. One will contain 500 lines, second one will also contain 500 lines. Now, these 500 lines are independent of each other. Means this second, suppose this is flow 2, this is flow 1. Flow 2 does not require the completion of flow 1. If I want to start flow 2, I analyzed and found out this to start second flow, I don't have to wait for first flow to complete. That means these are two independent, these can be done independently. So now what I does, I have appointed two persons. So now these two persons can work on codes independently so that my performance will be upgraded, right? This is what called as multiple or parallelization, right? Now, what we have done, we have created two flow, one flow and second flow, and I've assigned these two flows to two different persons. Now my performance is enhanced, right? And time complexity has been reduced. Now, this is what called as this can be also called as multi-thread, right? What exactly multi-thread is? This flow 1 and flow 2 that we have just discussed, each flow can be called as a thread. Now I have created how many threads? Two threads. Now two threads are created, and these two threads are executed independently, parallelly, so that time requirement will be reduced and performance will be enhanced, right? Now the biggest question is how Java supports this one. See, in Java we have a machine called as Java virtual machine, which is supposed to execute the program, right? By default, Java does not support any parallelization. It supports only one thread to be run at a time. Remember, if we do not declare any thread, don't worry how to declare, we'll learn in some other classes. Every Java program, listen to this very carefully. Every Java program by default has one thread, right? This is automatical. This is implicit thread, right? This thread is created automatically, right? And JVM can execute this particular thread. That means if we want to create multiple threads, that means we need to create these threads by ourselves, right? Or this one can be called as explicit. So we have to create two explicit threads. And how Java will help me? Java has its own API. Java has its own API, or you can say Java has its own function which will help me to create multiple threads in a program. So now the advantage of creating a multiple thread in a program helps me to enhance the performance of my program. So this is what called as multi-threaded. This is why Java is called as multi-threaded programming language. I think this will give you a clear-cut clarity what exactly multiple thread is. Or to be sum up it, what exactly multiple thread is: running multiple threads at a time in a Java program to enhance the performance of the program, right? So what conclusion we can write it here? The conclusion is, if you want to take a note that what we have discussed, you can write all those down, or all those down. Still, I can again start, I can again write. Remember this point: every Java program has one thread by default, right? And if we want to create multiple threads, we have to use Java API, so that we can create multiple threads, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, whatever threads. Now the advantage of multiple thread is, now all these threads are can work parallelly together without waiting for each other. Now the time consumption for this execution is basically reduced, and this is the advantage of multi-threading support. And Java provides lot of API. API stands for Application Program Interface, or you can call this as functions. Java provides a lot of functions by using which we can easily adopt this multi-threaded concept, right? So we can add here JVM JVM won't sorry JVM won't start support for parallel execution. Remember this point. Won't start support for parallel execution, right? But it provides multiple library to multiple libraries, right? By using which we can create multiple threads, right? By using multiple threads, the performance will definitely increased, right? This is what called as this is why JVM Java is called as multi-threaded programming language. Remember, this all these multiple libraries are inbuilt features. So you can write one more point: in Java has inbuilt support for multiple threading by rich Java API. If you want, you can add that point instead of this point, or you can add one more point here. That point is, Java has inbuilt support for multiple thread by its rich API. API stands for Application Program Interface, or you can treat this one as some functionality. application program interface. So this is why Java is supported by multi-threaded programming language. And the next feature we have to discuss is robust. So if I'll ask you what is the meaning of robust, you'll say, sir, very, very strong. So robust, if I'll conclude it in one point, a programming language can be called as robust if that particular programming language, a chance of getting fail at runtime is less. If a programming language provides this facility, that means if the chances of failure at runtime is very, very less, that particular program is called as robust programming language. Let us understand what are the different time when this programming language basically failed at runtime. What are the different issues for that? Right? We'll go like one by one. First of all, due to syntax error, suppose I have written a syntax wrongly, I have written a data type wrongly. Suppose I have written in a program, I have written like int a is equal to 10.5. When this particular code is executed, you know integer cannot contain a decimal point. So we know integer can only contain whole numbers, and if I am writing something like this at runtime, it will fall like integer will be a will be 10 because 0.5 it cannot hold. That's a rule, right? So now when this particular code is executed at runtime, there might be chance due to some data loss, some error calculation will be there and the program will be terminated abnormally. There might be chance. Now this is number one. If something is there, if some syntax errors are there, if some issues like this are there, then there might be chance of failure. Second case is suppose while running the program at runtime, we might require some memory of let's say 50 KB or 100 KB, and which is not free at that time. Suppose I have created 10 variables. After 10th variable, I require 12th variable, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18 variable, 20 more variables. So at that particular point of time, what I cannot do, I cannot free this memory and I cannot accommodate this these variables into memory. So what I'm trying to say is, if there will be problem with non-availability of memory due to occupancy of unnecessary objects. Suppose I have declared 20 variables. Out of 20 variables, 10 variables are not used. Like 10 variables are unnecessary there. Right? Now, if we are taking some precautions about that, we can easily free this memory. But the programming language that we were using previously does not support all this. That's why there might be chance if sufficient memory is not available, your program might be failed. This is reason number 2. Then we can go for reason number 3. In reason number 3, suppose let's discuss about a context. Suppose I am writing for a program. I am writing a program. Please read a file that is located in some remote location, means some other computer, right? If this particular code, if this particular file is present in the remote location, it's fine. If it is not present in the remote location, my program says boss, file not found, and the program will terminate automatically, right? So I have discussed 3 cases. First case, if there will be some syntax error. Second, if there will be some out of memory error. If there will be some unexpected things happen in my program during runtime, then there might be chance my code will be getting failed, right? By producing some error. So every time I occur this problem, the output is the program will terminate abnormally, not normally, right? And for to control all this, for everything, Java has a solution for that. First thing, Java is strongly typed. Java is strongly typed. What that does mean? What that does mean? Because of 3-4 reasons, I'll give you 3 reasons for which I can say Java is a robust programming language, right? What exactly strongly typed is? See, for Java, every variable or expression should have a data type, right? If by mistake you are declaring a variable without a data type, suppose if I am writing an variable a is equal to something, by mistake if I have not specified this int, before going to runtime, my compiler says, boss, you have made a mistake. That means this code, the code with error cannot be submitted to JVM. So chance of getting error, chance of getting abnormal termination is not there. This is one reason, right? This is one example of strongly typed, but the cases will go more. Suppose in Java, I'm trying to write int a is equal to 10.5. Now, in other programming language, this statement is valid, but in Java, this is completely invalid. And this particular error will be raised by your compiler at compile time. If there is an error in at compile time, this particular code cannot be converted into bytecode and it cannot be put into JVM. So if this error code with error is not submitted to runtime, then chances of getting error at runtime will be 0, right? So what I mean to say is, suppose the input is a Java program where I have written int a is equal to 10.5. Now, when I compile this program using Java compiler produces an error. Now this particular program cannot move ahead because compiler says, boss, I found an error here. So the type compatibility check is done by compilers and it confirms the program with some kind of error in type compatibility should not be handed over to JVM, so that chances of failure at runtime is less for this reason, right? So what we can write here, type checked, type not type checked, actually type compatibility checked. Compatibility check is done by compiler only, right? So it cannot be, so if there are errors, then it won't be converted into bytecode, right? So due to this particular reason, chances of getting fail at runtime is less, because the problem is compiler itself says, boss, you cannot execute this program. In the program, if I am writing int a of 10.25, the procedure is I need to compile it. Then after getting compiled, it has to be handed over to JVM, then JVM will execute. Now, here the compiler says, please correct your code. It won't come beyond. So if the code is getting passed by compiler, that means there should not be some error like type compatibility. So type compatibility, the first region we have removed. And who is the person who is responsible for that? Your compiler only. Your compiler only. Number one. Number two, you will talk about, there is a component called as garbage collector. in in Java, we have a component called as garbage collector. What garbage collector will do? Garbage collector has two activities, has two functionality. First, suppose I have written a program. In that program, I have created 20 objects or 20 objects. Now, garbage collector will check out of these 20 objects, how many objects are not required, are not used. It will automatically check, garbage collector will automatically check which of these objects are not used, or in other words, which of these objects are useless, right? And after identifying this will destroy all those objects automatically. And once the objects are destroyed, suppose out of 10, out of 20, it find 8 objects are not in use, are useless. Now it will free the memory occupied by those 8 objects. So by doing this, it confirms memory shortage is not there. So your program cannot be abnormally terminated for this reason, because garbage collector can dynamically free your memory once the object is not required, which is not there in any other programming language. So what garbage collector do? How it helps to run my code safe? The first thing is it identifies the useless object in the memory. Not only it identifies, but also at the same time destroys all unused objects and free that free free those occupied memory, right? So chances of getting fail due to memory is less. That is number 2. Then we'll come to number 3, exception handling mechanism. What is exception handling mechanism? To understand this, we can have a better example. We can have a simple example. Suppose you are working in your desktop. Remember, you are working on a project which is very important for you, and you have only 4 hours to complete that project, and you just start writing at morning AM. You need to submit it at 12:30. So you need to complete it by 12, and you go on working 8, 9, 10 at 11:30. You have completed almost 92% of the entire program, entire project. You have all the codes, you have all the stuffs there in your laptop, in your desktop. Now you are about to complete the project. At the meantime, there is a twist. Twist is greed due to lightning and all power failures. Now your current is gone, and unfortunately you don't have a UPS backup. And also the problem is, being in hurry, you have forgotten to save all the work. Now the problem is your entire labor is gone. Suppose the power is got for only 30 seconds. The power get connected, after 30 seconds again the power is on. But for these 30 seconds, your entire job is basically lost. This is what called as exception. And this is called as abnormal termination. You have to terminate abnormally, because this is not the way you want to terminate the job. How you want to terminate the job? If it is completed purposefully, or if it is completed as per my requirement, then I'll say I have completed that one as per my requirement, right? Now, if anything goes beyond my imagination, I'll say abnormal termination, right? Now, how to avoid this? What I cannot do? I cannot say the power to cannot say the power to go off grid. That is beyond my control. But what I can do, I can use an UPS. So what I can do, if there is power, please use this grid power. Else, if there is no power, why don't you use UPS? Now, if this one get failed, this particular thing will be giving you the power. This is what called as exception handling. Even if there is a power failure, this particular code will happily execute. This is what called as exception handling. So the advantage of exception handling is without going for abnormal termination. Now even if this particular thing happens, my code still get executed and my program will terminate normally, not abnormally, right? And Java has lot of built-in exception handling mechanism codes to handle all these problems, right? That's why the chances of getting fail due to exceptions at runtime is very less, right? So we can add this point. The point is abnormal termination can be managed by Java by its predefined exception handling mechanism or exception handling features. It has lot of exception handling features. We can use them to convert my abnormal termination behavior of my program to normal termination of my program. So this is very, very vital. You need to understand this particular one. So exception handling mechanism is very strong in Java. And due to this, chances of getting fail due to exception is very, very less. See, so if somebody will say, why you are calling Java as a robust programming language, we have lots of reasons for that, isn't it? We have lots of reasons for that. The first reason is it is strongly typed programming language. We can see if there will be an error in some kind of typecasting, some kind of type, like if I'll store integer, float value in integer, double value in integer, my compiler is responsible to check that one and give me an error without submitting that error code to the JVM, because JVM is the person who can execute this code. So since JVM do not get some type compatibility issue, so chances of getting failed due to this is less. Second, garbage collector. Garbage collector's major responsibility is to free the memory. And exception handling we have discussed. If some exceptions are occurred at the point at runtime, we can easily handle and we can interrupt the abnormal termination of the program to normal termination of the program by using the existing or predefined exception handling mechanism by Java, right? Okay. Next is we're moving to a distributed programming language. What exactly distributed programming language is? See, to understand this distributed programming language, let us understand why it is required and what is the advantage, what exactly a distributed programming language is. Suppose there is a machine. In this machine, I have a Java program called as A1, right? There is one more machine where I have a Java program called as also the same Java program is there in one machine. Now, what we are doing, we are creating a load balancer here. I am calling this as load balancer. Now, what it does, once a request is coming from the crowd, Now this load balancer will check which one among these two is free, or which one among these two is not, is less busy than other. Then as per the requirement, as per the information it is getting from both the machines, it will submit the request to the corresponding machine. So the advantage is one particular machine cannot be overloaded, one cannot be underloaded. So the distribution of traffic will be uniform. As you can see, whenever there will be a result for your 10th class or plus 2 class, you all are go on requesting your roll number to the server. If there will be one server only and huge traffic coming into the server, at that point of time the result will be, it will be getting failed. So the greatest advantage is if this particular one will be distributed among different machines, then your requested could be processed accordingly. So this is what called as distributed application. This particular application is distributed in two machines. Maybe sometimes I want three machines, sometimes I want four machines. That purely depends. That purely depends, right? And Java supported all of this by its internal component. I'll let you know what are those what those components are. Now the question is, if a job is distributed among various JVMs, number of JVMs or number of machines, then that is what called as distributed application. So we can write like, if the application functionality is distributed across various, or you can say across several JVM or machine, then this is called as distributed, right? This is called as distributed. Now, how Java does this? Java has its inbuilt or predefined components, like one component is RMI. RMI stands for remote method invocation. One is EJB, and one is Corba. Corba is an outdated concept. Nobody is using like that. So these are few components like RMIs, EJB, and Corba. With the help of these components, Java achieves this distributed kind of thing. Now you can ask me, sir, you said distributed is like this. What is the advantage of being distributed? Like, one advantage we have already seen. Let us talk about the second advantage. Suppose I have a load balancer here. Now we can understand the same program is distributed in different JVMs or different machines. A1 is here, A1 is here, and A1 is here. Now, load balancing. Now, a request coming into load balancer. This is the load balancer. Now, suppose due to some problem, one of the machine get crashed. The code inside this machine got crashed. Now, what happened? All the requests that are directed to this particular machine will now be redirected to some other machine. So in that scenario, the people who are requested for this machine can also get the output. If it will be not distributed, it will be in a single machine, then the problem will be the request is coming to here and the system is crashed. Now you can easily sense what will be the problem. Being distributed, each of the requests, there might be a chance each of the requests can have a response. There might be a chance. There are less time when this entire thing will be failed. So by the term distributed means we can distribute the application functionalities across several JVM. One functionality, all the functionality across all the JVMs, JVM1, JVM2, JVM3. When the request is coming, this load balancer will decide which JVM has to perform this task. If one of the JVM get failed, no problem at all. Remaining JVM can take over this particular functionality. So this is the benefit of distributed, and Java supports distributed programming concept by using RMI, EasyB, and Corba, right? Not only distributed, since it gives distributed, you can say also it gives support for single standalone application, right? Distributed is most useful one. Standalone, every programming language has their standalone nature. Like standalone is not a big deal. The only big deal is your uh, what do you say, distributed kind of application, right? And the next feature we should discuss is dynamic programming language, right? Okay, dynamic programming language. Now the question is, why when a program can be called as a dynamic programming language? Let us understand this point. Then we can say Java, how Java achieves dynamic. The people who are coming from C and C++ background, they can understand this one. Then I'll let you know what exactly this one is. Suppose, if you can recall, we at the beginning of the C program we are writing has include something .h. Then we are writing the main program. When the compiler compiles that particular one, what it does, it includes all the functions here, and it is compiled that one followed by others, right? Isn't it? So both of the things are getting compiled. Even if I do not require all the functions present, suppose there is a file in a header file, I have there are 10 functions, but out of this 10 function I require only 2 function in my main. Even if I require 2 functions, all the 10 functions are getting compiled and compiled unnecessarily. This is the problem with static programming language. In static programming language, once I include something, the memory space and all the things will be compiled. Even if I require 2 functionality, 10 functionalities, since 10 functionalities are there, it will be getting compiled. So wastage of memory, wastage of time is there. But dynamic nature of Java, we can call dynamic nature as load on demand. What that does mean? What that does mean? As we know how Java programs carried out, we have to write a Java program, then it is compiled to .class file, then it will be come across JVM to execute the program. This is the normal scenario. This is the normal scenario. Machine level machine code, then it will be get executed, right? Now the question is, suppose in a Java program, like this scenario, in a Java program, I have 2 classes. Suppose this is a Java program. In Java program, there is class 1. I have declared this one. There is one more class 2. I have declared this one. Suppose this is the main class. Now, when I compile this file, 2 class files will be generated. Let me write that down. Suppose I am writing class A. Right? Here I am writing class B. A main. Once I compile this program, A dot class will be generated. So also as B dot class will be generated. If I am not called A dot class here, only this person will be loaded and this will be executed. This particular one will never be called. But in normal statically programming language, even if this one is not called here, even if it is not called here, it will be getting reserved in memory. So this is the problem with static programming language. But in dynamic programming language, this one only be loaded if class B is calling class A. If it is not calling class A, this will not be getting loaded. So this is what called as call on demand. So if in a program I have 10 lines of programming code. In line number 2, I need one functionality. In line number 3, I need second class. Suppose in my system, I have 10 more class files are there. But all these 10 class files are not loaded. Only these 2 files will be loaded as and when these 2 are required. This is what called as dynamic programming language. And Java, of course, is a dynamic programming language, right? What we can write is, we can write only dot class is loaded at the dot class file will be only, should not add, dot class is loaded only when it is called or it is required, right? It only when it is required, otherwise it is not called. Dot class, all dot class files are not loaded at the beginning of the program, right? All the primitive values or data types are not loaded only at runtime. And who is responsible to load the class file? Remember, JVM is loaded dot class file only when it is required. Let us understand this one in a broader way. Suppose I have a header file called as s.h, and in this header file I have 20 functions. Now I have a main program. I'm talking about the old language. I have included s.h. Then I have written the main method, main function. In the main function, I have called 5 functions from this s.h. Remember, s.h has 20 functions and I have called only 5. Now, what is happening here? Even if I have requirement of less 5 number, whenever I am writing s.h, all these 20 lines are loaded at the beginning of the program. Once the program is compiled and ready to execute, all these codes are available here. All these codes are available here, regardless of all these are required or not. Right? This is the problem with static. But in dynamic, even if I have 20 functions, even if I have 20 functions, whenever I'm loading this one, at this point, this will be not loaded. This will be not loaded. Only this will be only called. Which one will be called? Suppose I want function 1. Now function 1 only be called at this point. Function 2 will be called at this point. Function 3 will be called at this point. And the responsibility to call on demand is basically of JVM. So JVM will load the class or the required file only at runtime, only when it is required. Otherwise, it will not getting loaded. This is what called as dynamic programming language, right? Or you can, in shortcut, you can call this one as load on demand. And the next, last two. First, this is actually, you can call it as interpreted, and we can call this one as compiled and interpreted. Not only interpreted, we can call this as compiled as and interpreted. This is obvious what exactly this one is. Every Java program is compiled first, to bytecode. Remember, it's not a machine code. Next, it is interpreted to machine code and got executed. Right? Okay. What exactly that does mean? Let us understand. Whenever we are writing a Java code, suppose this is a Java code with the extension name .java. The first step is, after writing a Java code, we need to pass it through a Java compiler. And if there will be no error, no syntactical error, no other grammatical error, it will be converted into a file with extension name dot class. This is what called as a bytecode. This is an intermediate code. You can call this as a bytecode. This is not machine code. You make sure this is not a machine code. Now this bytecode is handed over to one more application called as JVM. Now JVM is called as interpreter. What JVM will do? JVM will read the first line, convert it into machine code, then execute it. How it does? Suppose in a bytecode I have 20 lines. For first line, what it does? It goes to read, interpret and execute. Similarly, for second line, read, interpret and execute. It will do the same thing for all the lines, right? So that's why Java is not only called as compiled, but it is also called as interpreted. Right. Now you can ask me, sir, why this two process? What is the advantage of this one? See, a lot of advantages are there. Advantage number one, the compiler is smart enough to check various types of error. Error like syntax error, error like type compatibility, errors like other concepts like abstract and all different errors. Now all these errors are checked at compile time. That means the code that is submitted to JVM is basically a smooth code which is error free, right? Now JVM will do one by one transition and happily execute it, where the chances of getting failed is very less. That is one reason. Second reason is due to architectural neutral and platform independent. If we compile this code to bytecode, this bytecode can happily run on Linux, it can run on Windows, it can run on Mac. So this is one more advantage. If we compare this one with the old language, suppose C language, I am writing a program in Windows platform. Can I run this particular program in Linux? No guarantee. No guarantee at all. But here, 100% guarantee is there. This is a compiled language. This is a compiled as well as interpreted language. There is the difference between these two, right? So all other advantage as you grow with Java, you will definitely understand about this compiled as well as interpreted, right? So one thing you should have a clear clarity. This compiled and interpreted has lot of advantage. So Java is a programming language which is not only compiled but also interpreted. Interpreter, Java interpreter is, you can write interpreted by, you can write JVM. Right, Java interpreter is JVM, which is again doing lot of stuffs, right? And the last one is high performance. So if I compare this one with other programming language, it is definitely, the performance level is definitely high. Let us understand what exactly, how the performance of Java programming is high. So as from here we can understand, suppose in a Java program I have written a code, I have written a method M1, and in M1 I have 200 lines of code. In the main function I have called M1, 10 times. Now let us see what happens. Every time M1 is called, after getting converted into bytecode, what JVM will do, we have just discussed what JVM will do. To take the first line of code, read, interpret and execute. Second line, read, interpret and execute, right? So for the first time it is doing the same thing. For the second time, again M1 is loaded and again the first line, read, interpret and execute. Go on. Similarly, next time, so it will continue for how many times? The number of times that I have called M1. Clear? Now the problem is, if we are doing this, don't you think the memory utilization or the performance is degraded? Now this is the life with a compiler which is not a hotspot compiler, but Java introduced a compiler called as hotspot compiler in the version 1.2. Right? If you are using a hotspot version, what it will do? It will introduce a variable called as count variable. Suppose M1 is calling for the first time, the count will be 0. And this is the process normally JVM will do. read, interpret, execute, read, interpret, execute up to the last line. Suppose second time the count is 1, no problem. For the second time, same operation will do. For the third time, when your JVM sense, acha, this is the thing that is going repeatedly on and on and on. Now, the same process will not be done simultaneously. What it will do? Your JIT compiler or JIT, just-in-time compiler, which is a part of JVM, for which we are calling the JVM as a hotspot compiler, hotspot interpreter or hotspot, right? Now, for this, JIT compiler, JIT does what? JIT will convert this M1 into machine code. So the advantage is we don't have to interpret it once again. We can directly call and execute it, right? Up to 3, up to threshold level 3, it is getting interpreted and executed. But after the count is 3, the JIT compiler will convert this particular one into machine code. So no further interpretation is required. So the performance level will be increased. So the performance level is increased only because of JIT compiler, and JIT is a part of JIT compiler is responsible for high performance. What it does? What it does? What is this? Basically, as I have discussed, it will convert a particular method or particular method call into machine code if it feels it is called in the same program for more than 3 times, right? The advantage of getting things into machine language is you don't have to go for the same one, right? If I'll repeat again once again, M1 is here with 10 lines of code, and M1 is called for 10 times. When first M1 is called, if it is a JIT compiler, it will set the counter as 0, right? What it will do first time, line number 1, read, interpret, execute. Line number 2, same. So up to line number 10, first is done. When the second M1 is called, same procedure is done. When the third time it is called, now the problem is, once third time it is called, at that point of time the counter will be 3. Now this is the time when JIT converts this M1 into machine code. Now once it is converted into machine code, it doesn't require any interpretation. It can be directly executed, right? This is how the performance level will be enhanced. So who is responsible for performance enhancement? One of the component is JIT. But if you compare this Java with traditional programming language, then it is high. But compared with C and C++, it is low, right? So these are all 12 features that we covered thoroughly about Java programming features. Hope you all are clear about this, about all the features. As I have repeated, this is not the only 12, this is not the exact 12 features of Java. Java has much more than this, much more than this. So once we go inside Java programming language, we'll understand the different features, we'll understand the different technology, different aspects of Java that might help us in writing programs. Once you know the concept, you can go on adding different features by yourself, right? So in the next video, we might concentrate on different aspects, like we can start with Java coding standards. We'll understand, or we might go depth into bytecode, responsibility of bytecode, how bytecode is architecture. Maybe we can go into that. Till that time, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you.